Welcome to this explainer. Imagine, if you will, a room that's just completely, almost uncomfortably silent. Well, mostly silent, except for that low, steady hum of fluorescent lights buzzing way up high in this massive, cavernous warehouse. You know the kind of place. Dust is hanging suspended in the air, honestly looking like tiny floating particles that are physically trapped in time. And right there, right in the dead center of the room, stands our subject, the unbreakable table. We're talking a sheer, pitch-black surface, razor-sharp steel edges, and literally not a single scratch on it. It doesn't bend, it doesn't shake, it just exists.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Some objects are fragile because they break. Others are fragile because time breaks them. That quote sets the absolute perfect stage for our analysis today. We're looking at episode 6 of the Unbreakable Table series, and let me tell you, it is a fascinating exploration of not just physical durability, but of time itself. It hooks us right from the jump on this really profound core theme, the battle between sheer, unchanging physical strength and the totally inevitable, unstoppable force of time.
Which brings us to Section 1, Two Unlikely Subjects.
So in this incredibly stark, almost sterile warehouse setting, the team introduces what is essentially the primary antagonist to our cable. A hand reaches in and carefully places an object dead center on that flawless, scratch-free steel surface. And what is it? It's a pumpkin. An ancient, organic, heavy, and delightfully imperfect pumpkin. The cinematic contrast here is just wild. The harsh studio lighting pours over the setup, and it highlights all the pumpkin's planetary imperfections, right? Every curve, every rough patch, every little valley of shadow on its skin completely defies the black, flawless, unyielding permanence of the table underneath it. You literally have cold steel meeting warm, temporary biology.
Moving on to Section 2, Testing the Physical Limits.
Now I know what you're thinking. This setup seems a bit bizarre, right? But it's actually a highly deliberate test of weight and physical presence. The crew is trying to push the boundaries of what this table can physically handle before we get into the more abstract stuff. So they get right to work. First, they start stacking a bunch of smaller pumpkins all around the main one. White ones, green ones, those tiny decorative ones barely bigger than a fist. And the table doesn't even flinch. Actually, someone on the crew even jokes that the table seemed disappointed by the weight, like it was waiting for a real challenge. So they up the ante. A crew member uses both hands to heave this enormous, scarred, incredibly uneven giant pumpkin toward the table. I mean, it's so heavy it almost takes two people to carry it.
And they drop it. Thud. You hear this deep, resonant, heavy physical impact. And then, just absolute, unchanging silence. A closer look confirms it. There's no crack. There is zero vibration. Just the absolute stillness of unyielding steel.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next major pivot in the experiment. This table survives everything placed on it, but survival is not the same as transformation. The sheer physical strength of the table has been totally proven, but as they point out, surviving something is completely different from transforming. Suddenly, the sterile steel is gone, and we're looking at a knife slicing violently through the pumpkin. We see orange flesh, seeds spilling out, stringy fibers stretching under the blade. It is a chaotic, messy reality, and it's a massive contrast to the smooth precision of the table beneath it.
Then the soundtrack shifts. The room fills with this cold, ambient drone echoing through the vast space of the warehouse. Someone walks right up to the table, raises a hand, and taps the steel surface with their knuckles. Solid.
Then they tap the thick skin of the pumpkin right next to it. Hollow.
The rhythm starts bouncing back and forth. Knuckles on steel. Solid.
Knuckles on the organic shell. Hollow. This simple, sensory, back-and-forth sound sequence completely shifts what this explainer is even about. We aren't watching a simple test of weight and gravity anymore. We've officially entered a philosophical meditation on the completely opposing natures of these two entities.
Section 3, Biology versus Permanence. To really grasp this meditation, we need to think like a scientist for a second. We have to analyze why the pumpkin is fundamentally, structurally different from the table it sits on. It's actually broken down perfectly for us. The pumpkin is simply a biological container. Think about it. It's just a temporary vessel full of water, fibers, sugars, and living cells. From the absolute second it's born, it's on a ticking clock. Bacteria and air are inevitably going to reclaim it. Decay is unavoidable. But the table? The table does not participate in biology. It completely, utterly resists the cycle of life and death. And we see this beautifully illustrated as a timer starts ticking.
At 0 seconds, everything is completely pristine. Fast forward a few hours, and you can see slow condensation starting to form right beside the pumpkin. A full day later, the crew comes back. The pumpkin is still there, sure, but it's noticeably softer. These tiny imperfections are starting to spread across its surface. It's an incredibly unsettling contrast, honestly, because while the pumpkin is actively fading away right in front of our eyes, the table beneath it remains hauntingly untouched.
Now, what's really interesting about looking at this under a thermal scan is that the visual language becomes almost surreal. Heat patterns start blooming across the view like fire, just full of energy and temporary warmth from the pumpkin. But the table, it's so cold, so entirely disconnected from biological warmth, that it basically becomes invisible under the thermal lens. It is a striking, rapid-fire contrast of life versus absolute void.
Let's move to Section 4, Destruction and Transformation.
Things really speed up here. We get rapid cuts between these contrasting images: seeds, steel, skin, cold surfaces, silence. And then, bam, the tension breaks. We reach the dramatic climax of the physical experiment. Out of nowhere, a pumpkin is dropped from 10 feet high directly onto the table. In glorious, incredibly detailed slow motion, the impact just explodes across the table in bright, chaotic orange fragments. Seeds are flying through the air like debris from another planet, just scattering everywhere. Every single angle captures these thick, wet pieces of pumpkin sliding across that perfectly black surface. And underneath all of that spectacular, messy destruction, the table is completely intact, not even a single dent.
As the dust finally settles and that chaotic, slow motion fades out, we get a really calming, grounding observation. The pumpkin sacrificed its form. The table sacrificed nothing. It forces us to just pause and look at the stark reality of what just happened. The organic matter is totally destroyed, but the inorganic stage, it's exactly as it was.
But it doesn't end with destruction. The warehouse crew comes walking in, laughing, actually commenting on how the pumpkin smells sweeter after the impact. They start cleaning up, and suddenly the table transforms. It becomes a stage for human creativity. They start arranging geometric patterns out of soup ingredients. Somebody paints a face onto a pumpkin with silver paint. They light candles, dimming the warehouse lights down until the pumpkin glows softly in the dark. Someone even takes the broken pieces of the exploded pumpkin and arranges them into abstract art. The focus totally shifts from destruction right into ritual.
Which leads us to our final section, Section 5, What the Table Teaches Us.
This brings us to the final meditative takeaway of the entire experiment. The team cleans the table completely. They place one single untouched pumpkin right back in the center, lit up by one solitary overhead spotlight. The music just drops out completely. For almost 30 seconds, there's no narration, just this enormous, heavy silence. So, the crucial point is summarized perfectly here. Humanity has always placed meaning into objects that eventually disappear. The unbreakable table itself doesn't inherently mean anything. What it does is elevate the ordinary fading objects placed on top of it into philosophy and sculpture. It's essentially a permanent canvas for us to project our temporary human meaning onto the things we know aren't going to last.
I want you to really think about this question for a second. What happens when something temporary touches something permanent? Based on everything we've just unpacked today, the permanent object doesn't change, but the temporary object? Its fleeting nature is completely magnified. Its decay becomes art. Its existence, however brief it is, becomes incredibly meaningful, precisely because it is contrasted against forever.
We hear one last, profoundly impactful thought. An unbreakable object teaches us nothing about immortality. It teaches us about everything around it that fades. And as that sinks in, our view slowly, deliberately pulls upward. We just watch that small pumpkin shrink beneath the spotlight, resting on a table that suddenly appears dark, vast, and completely endless.
The view fades completely to black, and we're left with one final, lingering sound, the crisp, lonely ping of a single pumpkin seed dropping onto cold steel. It leaves us with a pretty massive question. In your own life, what are you treating as permanent? And what fading, temporary things are you failing to find the beauty in?